The Cloverfield Paradox. Now, this, of course, is the third film in the weird Cloverfield anthology of, well, it's still an anthology because of how it plays out, but trilogy of films. This review will be spoiler free for the first half, of course, spoilers in the second half, as the title suggests. But getting right into it, I was very surprised by this one. I didn't know it was really even a thing until like today and yesterday, I think, because I believe it came out during the Super Bowl. It was just like, yeah, full movie, not just a trailer. It's out and it's on Netflix. So I don't know if it's even a Netflix original or it was just like, just put it on Netflix. I have no idea. For whatever reason, it didn't come out in the theaters. I thought it was a good movie. Overall, I thought it was interesting. I knew quite a few of the actors, but it was pretty cool. I was like, all right, this is interesting. Going into it, having seen the first two Cloverfield movies, I was kind of curious just to see how this one would play out because if you've seen Cloverfield and then 10 Cloverfield Lane, both those movies are very different from each other, but they share the common ground of like they're monsters and stuff. So I was like, well, how is this gonna play out? What are they gonna do with this, and where is it gonna go? And some of that stuff I can't talk about without spoiling it if you've seen the first two and you haven't seen this one yet. So of course that'll be second half. But all in all, I thought it was pretty cool. I was like, all right, well, this is very interesting. It's the way they kind of handle it was a sort of in the beginning at least it kind of felt like aliens because you have some people like set in a specific location. It's like, all right, well, how is this going to play out? Weird things are starting to happen. What is the truth behind what's going on here? So it was pretty cool watching that play out, and I was like, all right, well, let's ultimately just see how this ends up panning out. So all in all, I thought it was a good film. After this is going to be all spoilers, so if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it, especially if you've seen the other two films. Well, admittedly, even if you haven't, because like I said, it's an anthology trilogy. None of the movies really connect to each other outside of like the one tie of the monsters being in there. So it's kind of like this element of you don't have to see them because the characters don't cross over or interact or anything like that. It's set in this world, and then this is what's happening, and that's like the monsters are like the one thing that really tie it all together. But it's basically three different types of movies, and that's like the one kind of anchor point that you can connect them to, and that's pretty much why they call it Cloverfield. But definitely think it's a good movie, so I highly recommend you guys check it out. So at this point, full on spoilers, so definitely get out of this. Come back to it after you've seen the film and let me know what you guys think about it in its entirety. But going into full on spoilers, I'm going to basically just start with the fact that this movie, being the third in an anthology trilogy of films, is totally different from the other two. Like the first and second movie was like, okay, I can at least see these being, on Earth. It's like, all right, here's this, and here's Cloverfield, here's 10 Cloverfield Lane. It's like, all right, they're kind of playing out at the same time, and this is what's happening, and then it kind of goes off, and you have the main character leaving, and she's gonna try to fight against the aliens, and then this movie kicks off, and it's talking about Earth's resources and stuff like that. I was like, okay, so they've been fighting the aliens and things like that, and then as it keeps going, it's like, no, they're not dealing with aliens because they were just kind of at a gas station. I was like, I don't think they're dealing with the aliens. And then it's just like things are super crazy, and they talk about the power outs, and I thought that was going to be the aliens coming in, and then it turns out that the world's resources are kind of just plummeting. Everything's just going absolutely insane, and they end up going into space, and then they actually cause the Cloverfield paradox. And I was like, well, I did not see that coming. The tie to the other two films, of course, being the aliens, was all on Earth, and we barely get to see them. We have it through the husband character, and we get like the little shadow, and then at the end of the movie, of course, we see one like shoot up above the clouds. Which admittedly, I kind of like the way they ended it, where it was like, oh man, we finally we made it back, and the husband was freaking out, like, tell them not to come back. And I was like, that's actually a cool way to end it, where it's still kind of this dark ending where ultimately they land back on Earth, but now there's like just all these aliens, all over the place destroying everything. So I was like, that's actually kind of a cool, creepy horror movie way to end it. So I liked the way it played out. I thought it was, all in all, I thought it was a really good film. I would say this is probably, I think I still like 10 Cloverfield Lane more, just because that was just such an intense film, and it was very, very claustrophobic. There are basically three actors pretty much through that, through that movie. So I thought the way that one was handled, where it was like a crazy psychological horror, suspense movie, and then this one was kind of like so that aliens vibe, like I mentioned before, where it starts off and it's like, okay, I thought the aliens were specifically going to be on their ship, like they caused this paradox, and things are getting weird and warping around, and it ended up being that they sent aliens to Earth. Pretty much they ripped open Earth, and then they got screwed up. They got sent to the other side of the sun, and then they were blending their version of their crew with this alternate dimension version, and it was just a bunch of chaos at that point. It was like the one guy had the worms transported inside of his body. He also had like the energy orb that was meant to power the whole ship that was transported inside his body as well. The one dude was like, I don't remember like anyone's names, to be totally honest. I remember the name of the ship was Shepard. I feel like they said the name of the ship more than they said anyone else's name. But the dude who got his got his arm cut, and it came off. I guess technically it was cut off, but it kind of just was, it just came off, and it was just like nothing. So that was really crazy, and just the way people were dying, which I also didn't expect everyone to die except for like the two characters at the end. I didn't think it was going to be like that sort of horror movie where it was like, everybody is dying, and it wasn't even really horror. It was definitely suspense. I think Cloverfield Lane may have been a bit more like as far as horror, because it was just like, this guy is the crazy one, so it scared you a little bit more as far as what is really going to happen next. So this one I wouldn't even say was really horror. It was definitely thriller suspense, but I like the way it was handled, because it was like, all right, well, what's going on? And then of course me having seen the other two films, I was like, okay, I'm trying to put some guesses in, like, are they dealing with different types of aliens now because they're possibly invisible? Maybe they just aren't showing them on screen. So I was like, okay, maybe they're dealing with smaller creatures. And then it's just weird stuff started to happen, and the arm comes off, and then the arm is crawling around by itself, and just a bunch of weird stuff was happening. And it's like, no, this is just the paradox. That was the main horror element of the film, like things just going crazy, and this woman being transported in, well, they technically went to another dimension, and then she's like inside the walls of the ship and stuff, so they have to rescue her. And just how everything was playing out, it was so crazy. But I love the way it was handled. I was like, all right, it's like just little things here and there. And like I said, the first guy was going crazy, and had the worms inside his body, and then he had the energy orb inside of him as well. One guy gets his arm taken off, but it's just like no pain, no nothing. And then they find out what's going on with him being in an alternate dimension, because they're like, oh, there's Earth. We were just kind of, shot behind the sun, and we were flipped upside down. That's what was going wrong. So they figure that out, and then it's like, what are they talking about with war and 40 months and all this stuff? And they realize they're in another dimension because the other crew already crashed on the planet, and there was no way to save the Earth, so everybody just went nuts. So that was pretty interesting. I was like, all right, I like the way this is playing out. And they would cut back and forth between the two dimensions, and we get to see the guy on Earth as he's helping out this little girl. And I was like, okay, that's a pretty cool way to handle it. And his story was just him kind of trying to figure out what's going on, like, helping this little girl and hoping that his wife comes back to him. And I thought that was pretty interesting. Him dealing like, we don't know what's going to happen now. There's just monsters. So I love the way it was handled. I thought it was a pretty cool film. I was like, all right, I think it's interesting. Like I said, I still think I enjoy the second movie the most out of these three. I mean, I guess if they did do another one, it wouldn't make a difference. And that's one of the weird things. All three of the movies end, and it's like, I'm curious what they would do next with that. But it's an anthology trilogy. Like, even the first film, technically the monster lives, so it's just like, what would happen? And then, in the second one, and like I said, that's the one where it's kind of one after the other, because that ends and she goes off to actually fight the aliens, and like humans are fighting back. This is just a totally different dimension from the other, the first two films. So it's like two brand new dimensions that didn't even exist, in the first one. Or I guess if we kind of want to look at it in some really weird sort of way, I guess technically you could say that the alternate dimension the characters went to is the original dimension of the first two films, but I feel like that probably would have been brought up, like, yeah, and we were supposed to be great after we beat the aliens, but it was never mentioned that the aliens ever actually existed, or the monsters. So it's basically just two totally brand new dimensions that none of the other two movies ever happened in this version of Earth. So I was like, that's interesting in itself. It's not even it's basically, it was almost like it brought the monsters from the first two movies and took them out of that that dimension, and then brought them into like this crazy pseudo dystopian sort of future where everything was kind of everything was like, this is our last ditch effort, like this last mission is the last thing that will kind of save us all. So that was interesting, or destroy us all, because of the whole paradox. But I definitely like how the movie played out. Like I said, the sort of mystery of it, from the very beginning, I was like, okay, this seems like it'll be pretty cool. I don't know what's really happening. I was kind of bringing in some of my expectations from the first film, like, okay, are they going to actually, kind of show the aliens off, and it would be, obviously much smaller aliens, or, is there something else super crazy going on? Why is this one guy like talking to himself in the mirror, which we still don't technically get an answer for. I guess that was like the two different versions talking to each other, and so like this character kind of ends up blending together, and maybe that's why he had two different things transported inside his body. Is basically each dimension had like one version of him had the worms transported in him, the other version had the orb, and that's that's why both are in there, because he starts talking to himself, and that's when he like switches, and then he goes to attack the one guy where it's like, oh, you were spying with the Russians or the Germans. So it's like, okay, that's interesting. He like was literally put together, and then everyone else is just like, I don't know what's happening. Everyone else pretty much got killed off, except for of course the woman that teleported. So that was it was definitely an interesting movie. I definitely enjoyed it. Like I said, once again, each movie kind of ends, and I'm like, I'm curious where that would go next. Like, can they defeat the aliens? Does it matter now that they saved everything as far as resources? But then it's like, well, no, there's aliens and monsters, so what do we do with that? So definitely a cool way to end it, where they come back to Earth, and then this giant creature pops up even above the clouds, so that's definitely pretty high. But I like how this movie played out. Thought it was pretty cool. Definitely an interesting way to do it, because like I said, it kind of had that aliens aesthetic where it's like, oh, things are going crazy on the ship, what's happening, and people kind of dropping off. Of course, even the first guy that really dies, I was kind of expecting him to just have like something burst out of his chest, like they're definitely going full aliens. But I love the way it played out, and the way the characters died was definitely crazy. The woman who's like frozen in the water, that was immediately visually kind of cool, because like once it cracked, of course, the vacuum of space and just froze everything instantly, which sucked. And then the guy, like, he already lost an arm, and then I thought the way they were gonna do it was that the metal was actually gonna like pierce through his skin as he was slowly walking. I thought that was visually, I thought that was a phenomenal scene, because you could see it like kind of stretching out towards the wall. I thought it was just gonna keep stretching, and eventually it would like just hit him, and then it would just shoot through him because it was being pulled by the magnet. But then it kind of grabbed him back, and I was like, well, that seems super weird, because it was like it was alive, and it grabbed him and pulled him back. I was like, that seems super odd to me, because everything else had just been like, oh, it's the paradox, and then that actually seemed like, oh, something's legitimately alive. It was kind of like with the foosball table in the beginning, where it was like, okay, something weird's happening. I thought it was an actual creature, and then this was like, no, it kind of for some reason just grabbed him and actually pulled him back to the wall, and I was like, oh, kind of alive, but not really. So it was definitely weird when it actually happened and it grabbed him and pulled him back. I was surprised, but it was still a really cool scene. I was like, oh, I hope he lives, because like I said, the dude already lost an arm. Of course, he was the comedic character. That actor is always like a comedy character. But it was like, man, he already lost an arm, even if it wasn't necessarily painful. It was still just like, oh, I hope he makes it. And then just everybody kept dying off in all sorts of different ways. I was like, man, I thought it was gonna be okay, but two people ultimately do survive. It wasn't just the main character at the end, but it was pretty cool. I like the way they handled her storyline as well, and of course, alternate dimension, her kids are still alive, and she sends the message to hopefully save that planet by giving them the schematics, and ultimately saving her children as well. So it's like, all right, that's definitely a cool way to do it. We find out that the other guy didn't end up being killed, even though I thought he was definitely shot in the heart. That's how they made it seem, and it was like, oh no, she just plucked it out and he was totally fine. I was like, oh, okay, well, all right, cool. But definitely enjoyed the movie, of course. We'd love to know what you guys thought about it, so please comment below. Let me know your favorite parts about it, least favorite parts about it. And of course, this is, with this being the third film, which one is your favorite? Least favorite? What did you enjoy about this one? What did you not enjoy about this one? Like I said, for me, I thought it was pretty cool. Definitely number 2 as far as the 3 films go. 10 Cloverfield Lane being number 1 for me. But I thought this was definitely really cool, and I like the paradox element of it, just being like this weird scientific thing. Is like, what in the world is going on? And then we just, what's happening on Earth wasn't really, it was so focused on the guy, it didn't even really kind of show off all the chaos and everything. It was kind of like just a simple story of him protecting this little girl, and I was like, okay, that's interesting, and just that dynamic of what they were both going through. So I really enjoyed it. But like I said, we'd love to know what you guys thought about it, so please comment below, let me know, and thanks for watching.